Hello and welcome everybody. So happy to see all of you here today for the final event of our fall 2022 lecture series, which is called Demanding a World Without Toxics. Just while everybody's rolling in here, I'll give a little bit of an introduction. So my name is Johnsara Ruth. I'm co-founder and design director here at Healthy Materials Lab. I'm also a professor of interior design and founding director of the Graduate Interior Design program at Parsons School of Design. So personally, today's guest is really exciting for me. Kia Weatherspoon is a force. She is leading the field of interior design on a path untraveled to serve people living in affordable housing and incorporating healthy materials along the way. She's a superstar. For those that are unfamiliar with our work, Healthy Materials Lab is a design-led research lab at Parsons School of Design at the New School. We dedicate ourselves to placing people's health at the center of all design decisions. In practice, that means we raise awareness about toxics in our built environment, and we work to make healthier alternatives more popular and more accessible. Our particular focus is to make affordable housing healthy. At Healthy Materials Lab, we understand that change begins when we ask questions, when we have conversations with experts from a variety of disciplines, and when we question assumptions about our own design practices. So this is why I'm excited about having Kia here with us today, and I am entirely honored to be able to introduce you, Kia, and to welcome you to our audiences. So here's a little bit about Kia. Kia founded her interior design firm, Determined by Design, 10 years ago. We've been hearing about the 10th year anniversary, which is fabulous. The title of her talk, Design Equity Isn't a Trend, It's Our Foundation, describes their core value. They trademarked the term design equity in 2019 to describe what fuels that determination. We noticed their incredible work and began working together 2 years ago to accompany them in bringing healthier materials into their projects. I can't emphasize enough how much we've learned from working with Kia, from working with their team, their vice president, Sequoia, and the rest of their fabulous group, including we've learned more about facing our own biases, about design aesthetics, and all kinds of things. So a little bit more about Kia. She is not only an interior designer, but also an advocate and an educator who spent the last 15 years defying the design stereotypes. She challenges the assumption that interior design is a luxury reserved only for a few. She and her team are making interior design actually a standard for all, which an impressive recent statistic is that over 2,700 underrepresented families get to call their spaces home that are design equity. Her leadership is prompting housing developers, agencies, and industry partners in economically challenged communities to do better, to adopt elevated, healthier design standards. Kia is a leader, not only of her own design studio, but also for the design industry, leading through conversations about equity and diversity. She's also a professor of interior design at Savannah College of Art and Design, where she is now. And arguably, Kia is the most decorated female designer of color of our time. Her long list of accolades include, and this is only a fraction of them, ICFF Designer of the Year, an honorary doctorate from the New York School of Interior Design. I'm sure there's folks in the audience, awards from both the American Society of Interior Designers and from the International Interior Design Association, a HIP Designer of the Year for Good by Interior Design Magazine, an awardee of the Washington Business Journal's 40 Under 40, and last year Oprah Winfrey named Kia a trailblazer, among many other accolades. And I quote, Kia believes change is possible when difficult conversations happen. She has them every day as a female leader of color, speaker, educator, and mentor who exemplifies what's possible for those who are determined by design. So you can find out a lot more about Kia and our work together on our website. And I'm anxious to let her have the floor. But before we start, I just have a few housekeeping notes. One is that the Q&A is open. So down below at the bottom of this screen, you'll see a box that says Q&A. So feel free to jot your questions down there as you have them. And if you see that somebody else has asked the question that you like, give it a thumbs up, push that like button, and then it'll push it to the top of the queue. Please use the Q&A, not the chat, for your questions. The chat is reserved for chatting, but the Q&A will allow us to keep track of all the questions. Another note is just that this event qualifies for one AIA CEU, the HSW credit. So at the end of the event, we'll share a link in the chat for you to register for your certificate. And now, Kia, I hand it over to you. Thanks so much for being here.
Fantastic. Thank you, John-Sara. Hi, everyone. My name is Kia Weatherspoon. If you can't tell, I'm really excited to be here. I see some familiar names in the chat. Great to see you. I would be remiss if I did not shout out my team: Angelica, Carly, Vicky, Rodney, Carly, Bianca, and John-Sara mentioned her, my amazing co-leader, Sequoia Hunter Suje. One, I think is a testament to what we do at Determined by Design, and how our team shows up for each other to collectively do the work that we do. I'm going to also ask for some grace right off the bat. As John-Sara mentioned, I am a full-time faculty member at SCAD. I am actually in the classroom right now, so if you hear some chatter, it's my students doing their end of quarter assignments. But I'm going to jump in right now. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to start with a little bit of my story. Some of you may be familiar with me, some of you are not. And I'm going to keep this really, really high level so we can get into the meat of this conversation. I'm going to share my screen here. All right, so a little bit about my background and what we do. And I feel like it's really, really important to think about what is design equity and how do our own personal stories really kind of reinforce our path and the work that we do that leads us not to a profession, but our purpose. Early on in my life, I went to school to be a ballet dancer, and I didn't get financial aid. And that would start me on this journey of joining the U.S. Air Force in 2001. And this was one of two pivotal moments when I realized that my interior space mattered. The first one I'm going to step back and talk about is when my brother was incarcerated when I was in high school. That would start my family on this journey of traversing in and out of prison facilities for 15 years. And I remember the first prison that I walked into, I remember the first thing that I said to myself is, this is fucking inhumane. There was no space or need for anyone to be in a space that felt that inadequate. And at that point, I was about 15 years old, and that just would sit with me, that feeling. And as we would continue to visit my brother, it would go from me thinking about how I felt about that space as a visitor, how it felt for the guards, how it felt for the men, the kids, and the families coming in and out of that space. Fast forward, I joined the military in 2001. And I get stationed at my first duty station in Wichita, Kansas. I get there in July, and then a couple months later, September 11th happened. And I was on my first of 5 deployments in the Middle East. And it was here in the Middle East where it was a bare base, and I was in a tent city, and I needed some privacy. And I didn't have it. So I took some sheets, I hung it from the top of the tent, and I made 3 sheet walls. And that was the first space I ever created. And I bawled like a baby for 15 minutes. And it was something about how that space, it healed me, it brought me comfort, and it brought me solace. So when I got out of the military, I said, I want to do this thing where I create spaces for people. And I became an interior designer. And this is the part when people go, oh my God, that's such a great story. And I always pause and say, but is it? I literally just said I had to go to prison and war to realize that my space mattered. I would then go on to get my bachelor's degree from Moore College of Art and Design, an all-women's college in Philadelphia. And shortly after that, I would move to DC. And I would do like what most people do. You want to be an interior designer and you want to do the hospitality because it's sexy, it's shiny, it has the great budgets. And I did that for a little bit. And then I learned one of two valuable lessons. The first one being that no one can dictate your path but you. And I learned that when it was time for me to get my degree from Moore College of Art and Design, my boss at the time said, you can go back to school full time or you could work here. You couldn't do both. Then I learned I wasn't motivated by money. So I quit my full-time job that was very lucrative and I went back to school. I then went to work for a residential company doing a multifamily company doing multifamily. And like our industry, it's notorious for working you long hours, underpaying you, and then burning you out. And when I experienced that for the first time, now that I had this degree, I thought, is it me? Is it industry? And I realized very quickly, it's neither, right? I think our path in this industry is we can only shift and change it to the ways that we need it to be. So I stepped back from that job, and that's when I decided to start Determined by Design. Things that were very clear for me at that time is I wanted to build a design firm that had leadership that looked like me and that a team that mirrored me as, thank you, Brendan, and a team that mirrored this industry. So the first thing I do when I start my business is I do a nonprofit project. And I know that sounds really, really interesting. Like, let me get this right. You started a business and then you decided to do free work. But this kind of set me on the trajectory of what my path and what Determined by Design would be. The first project we did was a nonprofit project for domestic violence survivors called Room to Rebloom. And we walk in there and it's 12 women and 32 children. And I'm very excited and exuberant. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna just design this space for you. And these women, what I found interesting is first, they were like, we don't need this. I take that back. First, they were like, calm down. Then they were like, we don't need this. And in that moment, I had to take pause and kind of really see where they were coming from. Not what I wanted to do for them, but how do I meet them where they are? So we shifted that conversation to, we're not here to design for you, but we're here to design with you. And to do that, we had to engage in a dialogue. And one of the most beautiful things that I saw was the women could tell me what every other woman needed before they could tell me what they themselves needed. So it took us on this journey of looking at the needs of each other, engaging in a dialogue. And it went from things like, we don't need this, to, I thought this is stuff I could only see on TV, to, is this something I could do one day? And when we finished the project, and when people think about interiors, it's often about the big reveal. And we had that. But the woman said to me, Miss Kia, when I walked into this room, I realized change was possible for me. And that's when I knew the people who need access to well-designed spaces the most, they don't know they don't have it, they don't know they need it, and they don't have an advocate. So that for me was the most critical and pivotal point in my career, because then I knew Determined by Design was going to be that advocate. We were right off the bat going to lead with equity and empathy. And one of the things that I have always said is interior design is the greatest form of empathy in practice. We just have to choose to lead with it. As Joan Sarah mentioned, we trademarked design equity 6 years ago. And I like to be very clear about that, because in today's climate, everyone's talking about equity, equitable design. And for us, it was never a trend. It was an ethos. It was our foundation. It is why we're here 10 years later with the team that we have. And to do that, and typically this is like an engaging part of this presentation, but we're gonna work with it. We're gonna work with it here. So things that we always like to do right off the bat is, how do we address these preconceived biases that we have when we design? And here you have in front of you 2 guest chairs, right? If you were to think about a guest chair in an office building, Class A, maybe a leasing center, the chair that you see on the left is typically what is marketed to us as a guest chair. The chair that we see on the right, this brown chair, that would be something you would be more in a hospitality setting. But then I always like to ask, but who says, right? Our next option, we have a senior chair. You think about senior living, and you think, there's a great chair here. This is what you see as a senior chair. Seat height, arm height, right, appropriate. This chair on the right, we specified this chair for a senior living project. And I remember when we specified the chair, the property management said, hey, our developer said, hey, Kia, this isn't a senior chair. I was like, well, what does a senior chair look like? And we went through this kind of conversation of, what is senior housing? What is it supposed to look like? So we took this chair on the right to a property and we left it there for about 2.5 weeks. And then I get a call from the property manager and they're like, Kia, we're upset. And I was like, what happened? Tell me. All of our residents want to know why we don't have a chair like this. So for us, we had to get rid of our preconceived notions of what is marketed to us and think outside the box of what is possible based solely on concept, aesthetic, things of that nature. I'm going to go through these slides also really quickly. When we think about what projects types we design for and who is it for. So here we have what appears to be a lobby, some type of office building, when actually it's affordable housing. We have another building here, seems to be residential, right? It happens to be senior housing. Again, affordable housing. But what you see is there is a disconnect between the level of design outcomes in between these three project types. And what design equity says is there should be no disconnect. There should be an equal level of aesthetic, softness, decoration, adornment. Yes, decoration. Interior decoration is where we need to begin to see. That is how we start to remove these labels. This is how we get rid of preconceived notions. This is how we don't foster a division among people based off of biases of what they deserve based off of their socioeconomic standing. I think sometimes that we forget as interior designers, we're in the business of people, not our clients. Another example, Providence Place. This was the original design intent from the architect. And I remember saying, well, what's our concept here? Why do we have this green column, this orange wall? And all they could really say is, well, they wanted a modern building. Those phrases, modern, contemporary, mid-century, those are styles that industry has reinforced that really speak to our ego, not to the communities that we designed for. So for this project, what we needed to do and where we had it to start and where Determined by Design always starts is with a concept. So our concept here became at the summit of virtue. And our concept always stems from the cultural, community, context of any site or project that we work on. This is the baseline of creating an equitable design outcome. So how do you start to incorporate design equity into your projects? This is where we really started to introduce our partnership with the Healthy Building Materials Lab, but really head on addressing this idea of storytelling, community, and people. The concept is critical. And you might be saying, of course, Kia, we use concepts, but do you use concepts or do you use styles and trends and Pantone's color of the year to really dictate what it is that you're doing? For us, a concept starts with the community and the history. This is one of the things that my VP Sequoia speaks to so eloquently. The concepts for us at Determined by Design is truly about creating a prayer or an intention for our projects. And to do that, we have to start with all the way back to the land, not the site, because the site is man-made, but the land is where we get that cultural heritage and context that we have to start with. And when you do that, what you will start to notice is there is an indigenous story present in every space that we design, but is that thread pulled through? Here on this particular project, this is called Momentum at Shady Grove. Our concept here were zones etched in travel. It was about the postal system, the railroad, but really creating an architectural element that fostered this aesthetic and that narrative. You see it all the way down into the materiality and the textures, but this is where, give me 1 second. To just quiet my team, my classmates, my students just a little bit. This is where we have momentum at Shady Grove, again, all the way down to the accessories and the decoration and adornment. And that's critical for us because what we see is in housing projects or project types for people for a specific socioeconomic standing, you often miss this element of softness. For affordable housing like the project like this, things we try to bring in and foster where you see this decorative fire feature. This is an actual sustainable product. It's an eco-smart fireplace. This is one of those moments where we thought we were doing something good, but what we learned is the cost of the ethanol, even though it is a cleaner burn, it really wasn't cost effective for the operations of the team. So now we do a water vapor fire feature. But for us, it's constantly looking at how to bring hospitality elements to every project, but course correcting when we need to. Fighting for transparency. This is also hypercritical. No one's ever been on a project where it hasn't been value engineered. But the thing that we often learn is when you're in the midst of a deadline and you're trying to get to your IFC set and you're trying to get to that GMP, sometimes as designers, we just kind of be like, oh, well, the GC said they have a valued engineered option and we just accept that. To truly create equitable design outcomes, you have to fight for transparency. Here is a light fixture on one of our affordable housing projects. The original selection that we made, let me walk that back. The original selection that the architect had selected, it was ugly. Point blank, period, end of story. And I think sometimes this idea of taste and truly saying it's inadequate is a thing that we don't do. We at DBD had to hound the electrical sub to truly figure out, well, what is the cost of the ugly fixture that the architect selected? We found out it was $5,000. With that transparency and having that pricing in hand, we were able to do this custom tiered lights picture that spoke to our concept, which was centered on symmetrical contrast. So it's these ways that we fight for the value of a project that really reinforces how we get to an equitable design outcome. My team will tell you when it comes to lighting, I believe more is more. So these are these elements that really uplift a project for bringing that level of detailing. Archer Park, here is another project where this is where the bias of the developer needed to be challenged. For example, they said no soft seating. Our residents can't have any soft seating in any of these spaces. And we go, well, why? Oh, they'll tear it up. They'll have sex on it. They'll do all the things because, they're poor. And this is where we as designers and those who are in service to people, we have to take pause and challenge the bias that sometimes our partners can have when creating spaces. So for us, it was taking a moment and having them understand what it means to have a contract grade material, what it means to use a more hospitality grade product and fabric. So these were ways that we were able to soften this space, and the usage of this amenity for the resident increased 40%. And what that fosters is this idea of gathering and community. A bias that we often hear is developers don't want those people hanging out. And we have to really be able to address how do we create places for all people to gather. People over profit. We talked about value engineering. This is one of my favorite projects. I take that back. All my projects are my favorite projects, actually. And this is Capitol Vista. I think what I gravitate about Capitol Vista is what it represents. This is one of those projects where we didn't have to value engineer out a single finish, fixture, or decorative element. We fought for the transparency of everything down to the wood blocks, to the custom screen grills that connected back to our concept, which was dividing the points along the boundaries. It was everything from the art to the local artisans. This is for us the example of how a design firm led by a person of color for a community of 104 where the average AMI was 30% below the area median income. And this was a level of design outcome and we fought for the transparency, and there was no value engineering. I don't care what the project type is, that's a victory. That is the work that we do. This is where we also got into our procurement firm, Lucidity Procurement, because what we knew was there were these insidious markups happening along the way on our projects. So in order for us to make sure that the community got the elevated design outcome, we created a procurement company. We created a procurement company where we're now partnering with Healthy Building Materials Labs to really, truly be able to source healthy and beautiful, and Jonsara and I will talk about that in a second, materials, because both have to coexist together. Everything down to the art. Our art story here was literally about reflecting the community members and the community so they could truly see their heroes there in this space. But again, using hospitality, decoration, adornment in an affordable housing project to truly show how you create an equitable design story. Another thing that we always try to do is connect with our community. Here's a project that we did, is called Bruce Monroe. And one of the things that I think people often miss about interiors is this idea of good space planning and a good furniture layout. What you see on the left was the architect's original floor plan. What you see on the right is something more thoughtful, hospitable, but we wanted to take it a step further and also engage the community. There's a school in DC called St. Coletta's, which is a school for the forgotten people. It's for adults and children with severe mental disabilities. And when they reached out to Determined by Design, they talked about wanting to hey, could we do some pillows? And we could start there, but we wanted to give them a long-term kind of program that could help with funding. So our designer, Ronnie Angelica, they created this custom tapestry wall that this school can now have a 2-year program to create this hospitality grade 15-foot high by 18-foot wide wall. This was a very intentional way to bring programming to a community entity and organization and still have an elevated design outcome for a development partner. So we're going to watch a short video on why design equity matters. Then Jonsara and I are going to have a little dialogue about our partnership. And then I'm going to get to some of your questions in the chat. Stop sharing my screen again. Can you hear my audio? Yeah.
Eyes on the door. This is a programmatic request. It's also a bias that plagues affordable housing. The design solutions to meet this need has been indignified for years. This was a design solution, an octagonal leasing office wall with windows. This type of solution is sharply reminiscent of the pan-octagon design used in prisons. There is no space for this type of solution in affordable housing. An alternative approach would have been an asymmetrical wall with storefront that would allow space for soft seating, art, and possibly a decorative finish. More importantly, a school-aged boy would not have to feel like coming into his front door, he needed to be watched. He will be met with plexiglass at the local corner store, the local post office, and banks. He will be met with this same watchful eye in retail stores, and unfortunately, at his home. This is why design equity matters.
All right, that video lives on our Instagram, so I encourage you to go watch and follow us. So I'm gonna have Jonsara join me so we can talk about our partnership. And then I also want to peek in the Q&A.
Yeah, I think the questions are starting to stack up here. So we'll definitely leave
Okay.
a bunch of room for for questions.
Yes. So I think one of them that I see right now is example of materials and system decisions that we use to apply across our projects. And I want to jump into that really quickly because the materiality piece, Joan Sarah, is really where our partnership started. And one of the first things that we told Joan Sarah and her team that we do is we do like materials, right? So whoever our tile manufacturer is on a project, we tend to use them in every single space, in the units, in the corridors, in the lobbies, in the bathrooms, any decorative element. So we can start to get those price savings of volume. Then same thing goes for, and don't shoot me, Joan Sarah. Same thing goes for LVT, which in our partnership, we've done a lot to kind of course correct on what product should we be using besides LVT, specifically in our units. And that was a big kind of discussion post for us, right, Jansara?
Yeah. This was actually the very first conversation that we had, right? Was about flooring. And I said, well, would you consider linoleum? And you immediately said, what, isn't that ugly? We're like, wait. But that's a big question, right? I mean, I think there's been a huge learning curve for us working with you and continues to be with you and your team, Sequoia. But, as we were first building that palette together, we were talking a lot about like aesthetics and perceptions, and like that question about like what is ugly to some and what's not ugly to others. And, that's one of those moments when we took a big humble step backwards to say like, oh, wait, our kind of like Western modern aesthetics is really a bias.
Absolutely. And
So,
I think, go ahead.
Yeah, no. I wonder if you could expand on that and like
I
how
think
that plays out.
I think for us, for me, it's, beauty design is subjective, right? For us, it's really about how do we bring warmth, softness to any space. And I'm going to hyper focus on a unit because what we're trying to do is truly create a beautiful and healthy unit. And when we started thinking about linoleum, I think there was a lot of ignorance on our part or my part. We have this mindset of what linoleum was from back in the day. And we are so used to seeing this wood look aesthetic in a home. And we really wanted to maintain that warmth, that texture. But then also kind of like when you think about affordable housing or projects in low income communities, you want to get the concrete look, right? Very industrial look. But the industrial loft is really one of those things that translates for the hippie gentrifier in what is it called in New York? New Brooklyn. Angelica, my team member, is going to cringe right now. She'll be all right. But for us, it was thinking about how do we get this look of wood? And I don't think the original product you brought to us could get Williamsburg. Thank you, Aaliyah. Thank you. But you know what I'm talking about. She knows. That's why she's laughing. We had to find that balance. So we started with a product that we felt like was a little bit too industrial. Then we went to a new product called New Wood, right? And we've kind of been really looking more towards that to move away from the LVT to the new wood. But where we're finding that hurdle is the pricing.
Right.
And I think this goes back to the question of what materials are we using? How do we fight the pricing issues? This is why lucidity exists.
Right. And that's, that has been, again, like an assumption that we had, like, okay, so we go into this thinking, okay, we need to find you healthier materials that match the kind of performance aspects of what you're trying to do, a resilient flooring, for example, or, a washable wall that also meets that same price point. And so when we started, we thought, okay, we need to have something that's super inexpensive, and how do we get there? But then you kind of countered that assumption as well. And you thought about it in a different way. So I wonder if you could speak to your, we've talked about Bolon for a while. And, which is a beautiful material, except it's made of vinyl, which, we were steering you away from. But
Mhm.
maybe you could talk a little bit about your approach to purchasing and how lucidity came to be and what lucidity is.
Yeah, so for us, you know, we wanted to control pricing, period. And what would happen, like in Capitol Vista, we had specified this backlit cool edge wall with a screen, a metal screen, and the GC was like, oh, it's like $90,000. And I was like, but is it though? And it was really $30,000, and we procured it, and we were able to have it kind of stay, the design aesthetic stick. So when we thought about, like, if that's happening with the light, it's happening with the tile, it's happening with the wall coverings, it's happening with the flooring. So we started Lucidity so we can begin to procure all the building finishes from the drywall out on all of our development projects. That is how we see the most savings, and that is how we are able to kind of not have to value engineer some of our design selections. We still, though, make very smart design decisions from a perspective of using like manufacturers. If any takeaway from this is, you know, what you put on the floor from tile, your wall covering, use the same vendor, you get volume prices. So Lucidity started out to be just for DVDs in-house projects. We also use it for furniture procurement and installation. But now we're starting to sourcing material for external design firms and acting as a purchasing agent of interior building materials for development partners on other deals. That's where Lucidity came from. But in conjunction with our partnership, sure, we can show the developer the new wood product or the linoleum products. I think Michelle says linoleum has so much potential. It does. But what happened is the linoleum was 4 times more expensive than the LVT. So how do you get on a subsidized finance deal? How do you get a housing agency or developer to eat the cost of a flooring product 4 times more expensive? That was the disconnect. And that's how, for us, having exclusive pricing with some of these healthier building materials, so the sub can't hide these exorbitant markups, so we don't have healthy and beautiful materials on our projects.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So just because I know we have a bunch of students in this event, can you just drill into that? Because one of your leadership and your superpowers is about business, about the design business. And so you've kind of cracked the nut on this piece. So just like drilling into lucidity a little bit, like what does that mean? What does it mean that you're building a business to procure from? If you could say it just like, simple words.
We're creating a monopoly, and the purchasing power is coming from us. I mean, my superpower is looking at a situation, assessing it, and stripping it down to the most basic thing. And basically, subcontractors are marking stuff up so much it can't stay on a job, and then it looks less than. And I'm saying, well, if you're not going to be transparent in how much it costs, I'm gonna buy it, and we're going to provide that transparency to the end user, period, full stop. Mm-hmm. Show me your receipts. That's what we're doing for the students.
So great. And so this is answering some of those questions about how you might purchase or specify a material that otherwise would be more expensive.
Yeah, yes, but this is the thing. It's not really expensive. I'll give you an example, right? We were specifying some tile. If you go to any bathroom in a unit in an apartment building, a unit in a hotel, one of our reps was telling us how, like, she was working with the Ritz, and they wanted her to get the tile down to like $2. And I was like, wait, Nancy, we use that same tile on our affordable housing projects, right? But it just gets marked up, right? So it's not complicated. We've just complicated it. As industry, we've complicated. Is that fair? Oh, that's my first "is that fair" of this whole thing. Oh my gosh, I'm doing so great.
You're trying to pull that out of your vocabulary. Such a great. Is that fair? Is that fair? Right along with everything you talk about.
Look now, and so sometimes my co-leader should be like, "But is it fair though, Kier?" So we always have to be like really cognizant of that. Is inappropriate ways of contact.
So there's a bunch of questions here, and I'll read them
Yes.
out to you. But right before we go into audience questions, and we'll give you the rest of the time, you audience, but I have one more from our team, which is, so there's the price of healthy materials that sometimes is a barrier to adoption. But are there other challenges you face, or what do you need from a healthier material in order to specify it?
What do I need from a healthy material in order to specify it?
Yeah.
This is when I'm gonna utilize my resources like Jonsara, Layla, and be like, hey, look, we're looking at the material. Is it good, bad, or ugly? What indifferent, right? Are we doing right? So to specify a healthy material, one, you got to start with your resources and asking the right questions, right? Tell me why it's not healthy. Two, tell me how it can be. What is in it that makes it healthy? That's where I start, right there. And then what are the benefits of it? And then it's how much does it cost? And then how do you maintain it, right? So why, how is it healthy, how much it costs, and how do you maintain it? Those are the three critical things for us to do our job. Now, I'm going to share a story. This isn't my story. This is my team's story. So we're working on a big project with NYCHA, and the team recommended new wood flooring option. We provided no vinyl flooring options.
Yes.
Now, none. That's the team. Shout out to the squad. And
Triumph.
Then we get into this conversation of like, we should put tile in the kitchen. And my team's like, but why? Right? And they're like, oh, because the residents, water damage, it'll flood. And, we're just like, but the cost of tile is actually more, the install, all the things, the transition, you're going to eat the cost. Like this cost is going to be exorbitant. And then also the way the housing agency talked about the residents and the maintenance of the product they wanted was just really biased, right? And assuming that because these people are poor that they would tear it up. And the team is on literally being adamant. This isn't a design decision we would make. We disagree with it wholeheartedly, and we, ran down all the list of why. Now, my team member did this on an email with every constituent on this project, the housing authority, the developer, the architect, right? And the architect sends my team member a sidebar email, was like, you replied all on that email. And she was like, yeah, I know. Now, the architect typically leads the deal, right? And then here comes the interiors firm. The disconnect happens when no one is willing to speak up to all the powers that be in that food chain to get to the equitable and healthy decision or product. After that email went out, they walked it back and said, we agree with the design firm. This is where we don't fight, right? This, and I hate to use that word fight, but this is where design equity, what Determined by Design does, is about being relentless. And as designers and creatives, sometimes we're too busy trying to get on the next deal and get the fee that we overlook so much that affects people for generations to come. Is that fair? Now that's fucking fair. For real.
That is fair.
For real.
Yeah,
for
that
real.
is
for real. No question there.
Speaking truth to power.
Yes.
But doing it in a way, I mean, that's doing it in a way that someone can hear it. I think that's part of the, that's part of the trick that you all do really well.
But see, and I see, I don't want to get the name wrong. Shay, she says, New York says the affordable housing budget is limited or non-existent. Can you share the approach and what is the average apartment in a couple of years? So look, housing agencies have money, guys. I think where the struggle comes in is how early we get on the deal, right? So we fight to be on a project very early on in the process. I think someone else asked, like, how do you add design equity to the proposal? Pam, it's not a value add. This is just how we operate, right? So we are notorious for, like, our schematic design phase is set at 10 weeks. So we can do that research, so we can do all of that deep dive. But it's not an ad service, but we have to get on the deal early, and we do a lot of educating about when we start early, we can be in the first preliminary pricing. That's how we also, oh, I'm sorry, Shirley, I sure can read out the question. Shirley, Pam says, what are the questions that come up when you add design equity to a proposal? What type of budget questions come up when the concept includes beautiful, healthy, and affordable housing? And what I'm saying is, it's not an ad service, right? That's just what we include in our design process, in our schematic design process every single time. You have to pad in that time for that type of work to be done.
So in Shay's question, I'll just read that one out. In New York City, affordable housing design budget is limited or non-existent, and you're answering this, Kia. Can you share how you tackle this approach, and what is the average apartment finish and public areas budget for these kinds of projects?
So I will say, data that we're starting to collect now is what is the per square footage cost for our affordable housing projects. Some of those projects that we just shared, like Capitol Vista, we're now trying to collect that data, Shay, so we can kind of have that. But as you can see from some of our photos, right, it's fighting for the pricing transparency so those materials can exist on a project.
And that's the strategy. Here's one it's been upvoted a bunch of times. I'll just read it out. And I think you've touched on this, but maybe there's something else in here. Finding my hands tied when working on government money on affordable housing projects, i.e. they're working on a CLT envelope building right now, which is so sustainable. It's all wood. Yet the interior environment materials are made up of materials that seem toxic. So in real time, how do I specify affordable materials that the client will also love?
So we do it in like small batches, right? So we started using Forbo marmoleum in the elevator lobbies on all of the floors of our of our multifamily buildings. Then in the units, we started to use, and I'm going to get the name wrong, is it Chem paint?
Chyme
Paint, right? Which is a mineral paint. So it's just going to sound like what it is, right? Who asked that question, John? So I want to make sure I address them.
Yeah, this is I don't want to butcher this last name. Kebabian Ford.
Yes. So this is the thing, E. When we swap out that paint spec, right, from Sherwin-Williams to Benjamin Moore, no shade, right, to the Chem paint, that's not a thing that the developer cares about, right? They just care about, is it paint? What we're doing when we make that change is kind of what we're prepping for is my labor cost going to be increased? What does my drywall finish need to be? How is it going to be maintained? So sometimes, I'm not even going to lie, we just slide this stuff in here because we know they don't care as much. That's how we start to do it. And then on the back end, we say, oh, and did you also know that this was a mineral paint? It's a lot more healthier, bop, 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 bop. As long as the price aligns, what we find is our development partners, frankly, don't really care if it's healthier. We do. We're supposed to, right? So I'm not trying to sell them on the healthier product. I'm trying to present one that says, oh, it does all these things. Oh, and guess what? It is healthy after the fact. Is that fair? I'm waiting for Sequoia to put in the chat, stop saying that's fair. It's not.
Well, that is fair. And, I think the other thing that's happening and we can use Chyme as an example, is that we have conversations with the manufacturer about pricing. We say, listen, like, this is a big project. This is going to be whatever. How many units in that particular project? Like thousands of units?
That particular project is a 25 unit condo building, right? But is it though? Is it smaller? Because if you think about how long that person is going to live in that building, how many generations of family, it's not about that I get the 200 unit building. It's what is the generational impact that we're always thinking about in every project that we do.
Exactly. So if we think about the residents who are living in there and how many of those residents will be affected and what, that multi-generational living.
Mm-hmm.
And then we go back to Kime and we say, listen, Kime, we know that you're producing a really healthy paint, but that's not going to be fair.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to be any good for us unless it can be price competitive with something like a Benjamin Moore or another common, paint product. And so we have those conversations, and they, just like you pointed out, Kia, price is fungible.
Yeah.
Price is flexible. And so Kime comes back and says, you know what? I can meet your price point. So because of the volume that you're going to give us in the course of your work over time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So yeah.
I see another question here I want to get to. It just scrolled. Crap. Sophie, she says, what questions do you ask to obtain transparency from the contractors, builders, and what has been budgeted for materials? Prime example. We just got a VE package for some lighting, and I go to my team member, just write, determined by design will not be accepting any VE options for any of these light fixtures. And the developer's like, well, why not? And I was like, we need to see the pricing. I mean, we literally ask. The same thing goes like when they're trying to swap out our unit tile. Maybe we want a backsplash, right? We ask, well, what is the pricing? And we kind of like put our foot in the sand and say like, well, we can't make an alternative selection unless we don't know what the price is, because then I'm shooting in the dark, right? So what we ask them is literally, show us the receipts, Sophie, and we can't move unless we know what that pricing is. And this is when I said, like, my superpower is like uncomplicating things. Asking for the price until they show us the receipts is how we get to attain transparency. And someone keeps asking, like, I think it's neat in NHI. I know that's not a question. Another question is like, how do we budget this into our fee and our scope? This is just a part of our design time, a part of our design fee. How we operate as a company, as a business, is we have to stop and ask these questions. Does our team do a great job at pricing before they even make a selection? Absolutely. We know that in our units, we need to have a floor tile that's maybe in the $1.50, $2 range. We know if we have more than 100 units, that's volume pricing. We know at minimum, we want an 18 by 36 or a 24 by 48 in the lobby. So we know that might be a little bit more elevated, but our team is constantly pricing super hard. Sylvie says flooring is super hard due to special relationships with subs and flooring distributors. Sylvie, you are absolutely correct. That is why we started Lucidity, so we can work directly with the flooring manufacturers and cut the subs out, not in the way that, I don't care how it sounds actually, because it is the subs that are marking it up so much and then doing a subpar product. And I want to be mindful of time. We're not getting to a lot of these questions.
We have a little bit more time.
Okay.
We have 6 more minutes. So that's good.
Okay.
I mean, I think a lot of these questions are pointing to this question. Like, how do you actually, like Talene says it in a different way, which is, echoing the sentiment, but how do you allocate the time that you spend on the projects carefully so that you select finishes and furniture that fall within the budget so that you really can, retain your design fee?
I mean, we have something, we have, I don't want to call it a proprietary workflow that we do. It's called the CDOT model. It's called concept design, and I just forgot the rest of it. But it's really about our workflow, allowing for time for these things to happen. Yeah, it's our workflow. Our workflow forces.
Yeah.
Hi, Doreen Hunter. It's great to see you. It's just our workflow. I don't know if we include that type of review time, in the workflow of most firms. When it's billable hours, get through the thing. It's just the way we operate. And I'm not trying to not answer the questions, That's just the value that we put on giving our team the time to do that research and call our manufacturers and say, we have X amount of this. This is where we need to be. How do we get there? We make time for it.
Mhm. So you spend a lot of time talking to manufacturers then?
My team spends a lot of time talking to manufacturers. I spend a lot of time just call like a stick up, but we need better pricing. We need a partnership through Lucidity to kind of have that pricing. That's what both the team and I collectively do. We spend a lot of time with our manufacturers.
There was a question in here, I lost it here, but somebody asking like, how can I get involved with Lucidity? How can I buy through Lucidity? Is that possible yet?
It is possible. You can send an email to myself or Carla at lucidityprocurement.com, and we can put that in the chat.
That's great. That's great. Okay, here's another question. Like, how are you tracking the durability and maintenance of new materials to ensure that they're going to last and be sustainable for the long term?
Lauren, that is a super fantastic question. We just went to a job site and I saw the cart for the maintenance team, Clorox cleanup, all these heavy bleach cleanable products. And it's like, well, that actually deteriorates the life of whatever the product is. So for us, it is truly kind of saying like, hey guys, here is a manual of how it's actually supposed to be cleaned and maintained. Then we take it a step further and we say, hey, product manufacturer, we do a lot of business with you. You need to send someone to said job site and show that property management and maintenance team how to clean the product. So as designers, we can't wash our hands of it after it's spec'd and installed. And we have projects in Chicago, DC, Florida, all over. And we tell our reps, like, if we're going to continue to specify this product, you need to be a resource for one of the two last people who are going to touch it outside of the resident. It is the property management staff. That is how we ensure longevity of maintenance and cleanability. And if that manufacturer is not willing to go that extra step to make sure that their product is sustained and maintained well, then maybe that's not a manufacturer you need to be working for. Or working with.
That's great.
That was a good question.
Sorry?
I said that was a good question.
Yeah, it is a good question. It's super important. And that's the next frontier, but there are great lists of sustainable, healthier cleaning products. And that can be part of every design, project is specifying how that interior will be cleaned, what they will be cleaned with. And then you said at some point, I don't know if I'm imagining this, but I think that there was a conversation either with you or with Sequoia talking about, speaking with or with the owners or even with the residents reps or residents themselves about cleaning products.
Oh, absolutely. So one of the things that I'm really excited about, and I think she's up here, she's always in like hidden incognito, is Lisa Moon. She has a PhD in psychology. She has a degree in interior design, and she is a team member with DBD. And we're actually creating the design standards for the DC Housing Authority for all their affordable senior housing projects going forward. And this is to set the standard for a housing agency of what materiality should be. And a big part of that is for Lisa and I, we did some extensive site walks, but also doing some resident surveys and engagement to really understand what cleaning products do you use and why? How do we shift that narrative, right? I always say, I've grown up, I use Pine Sol and Comet. They're probably all as hell toxic, but that's what my mom knew. It wasn't until later in life she started reading Real Simple, and now it's white water and vinegar. I give that story to say sometimes we only know what we know, right? So how do we educate that there's an alternative path and or product? Those are the things that we're trying to bring to the residents. So when we give them a healthy material, they also know how to maintain it and clean it with a healthier product as well.
Oh my goodness, there's so many more great questions here, but we are out of time. We are at the end of our hour here. And So we'll keep track of these questions. And if we can, if you'd like to get back in touch with us.
Oh, wait, Doug Seam says, are you seeking capital? Absolutely, Doug. I'm going to drop you my email.
Right on, Doug. You know exactly what to ask. That's awesome. And I think Caleb Anderson also said, like, as a designer of high-end residential, how can we help this? Which I think maybe we should continue to talk about that offline.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, there's so many questions. Will I get a copy of these questions?
Yeah, we're copying them down.
All right, I hope so, so I can reach out.
We have maybe one of our team members will just drop the email sign up in the chat so that you can sign up and we'll be in touch with you. We'll send you the recording of this talk and many other references and resources, the ones that you're asking for here. Thank you all for attending so much. It's great to have you here, all these vibrant questions about interiors and healthy interiors, and specifically and particularly about raising the level of affordable housing in the United States. I can't imagine a better team and a better leader to do that for our country, especially today as we're facing, a lot of new challenges. So thank you so much. Thank you, Kia, for being with us. And thank you to the Friends of Healthier Materials for your generous support, which makes these events possible. There's a sign up, I think, in the chat. Maybe Ahelia just put that in there to claim your CEU certificate. And I think that concludes our fall 2022 lecture series, Demanding a World Without Toxics. All of them are recorded. They're available on our website under Events on Demand. And Kia, can't thank you enough for sharing your passion, your work, your school with us today, your classroom, and all of your inner secrets. And we love working with you and can't wait to continue our work together. Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you.